Hello and welcome to 5 Year Club video number 153. The Italian video. Well, kind of. We're going to talk about Italy today. Not that I am an expert at all, but the stock market took a big dive today. The S&P 500 fell over 1% in one day, which is a pretty dramatic move. And I wanted to look a little deeper into that. Not too deep, but just a little bit deeper into that. The first chart we see here, this is the S&P 500 in 2018. So we can see that it is quite uppy-downy. It's quite volatile. Don't really know where it's going. Not much good has happened for investors since the beginning of 2018. And if we kind of back up and look at the last 5 years rather than just 2018, we can see that it's been a very nice ride, especially 2017. That was a very nice ride. I guess this is the only, this is in the last 5 years. It's only like the last 2.5. But I clicked on 5 years, so it should have given me 5 years, but it didn't. Anyhow, yeah, so very smooth, kind of nice ride upward in 2017. Beautiful year for the stock market. 2018, and so why is 2018 so bad? Well, people are kind of spooked. Debt is building up in a lot of different areas. There is, international stuff with North Korea that people are worried about. This trade bullshit with China that Trump has started. Trump is generally just crazy. But also, hey, the stock market's like super inflated. People are talking about corporations have taken on a lot of debts, and so the bond market, people are saying, is also very inflated. So there's a lot going on in the world in 2018 that is making this market volatile. So specifically, what happened today is that some political stuff in Italy. Basically, one party claimed that another party was going to try and install a finance guy who did not want to be in the Eurozone, and so they squashed it. But I'm just going to read an article about that so that you can decide for yourself. Let's back up a little bit and look at Italy in kind of a larger context of the Eurozone. Here we have a national debt ranking, right? So this is debt as a percentage of national GDP. And we can see that Greece, which had to be bailed out, is the most indebted country. But Italy and Portugal are not looking to be in very good shape either. And they're not. And we're going to see that in the articles that we read. But I would like to point out that the debt is a big burden on Italy. And being in the Eurozone requires Italy to restrain spending and to keep its debt under control. And some people in Italy do not want to do that anymore. There have been cuts to education, things like that in Italy. All right, let's read the article about what happened today. Stocks plummet amid fears about Italy's political crisis. The widening political crisis in Italy sent stock prices falling around the world Tuesday, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average losing 1.8% of its value. Wow, that's not what my chart said, but I don't doubt that they are correct. European bank stocks were among the hardest hit, with Italy's Unicredit and Spain's Santander down by more than 5%, but U.S. banks were also hit. As stocks plunged, investors poured money into safe havens. U.S. Treasury yields saw their biggest one-day drop in 2 years, and the dollar gained ground against the euro. The sell-off came after Italian President Sergio Mattarella, if I butchered that, Italians, I'm sorry, vetoed the choice of a finance minister who had sometimes been critical of Italy's membership in the Eurozone. The president's move stymied efforts by two populist political parties to form a government and made it more likely that elections will have to be held in coming months. Although the two parties say they are not considering a departure from the Eurozone, the mere suggestion of such a move has scared investors. The country presents the third largest economy in the Eurozone and also has substantial debt, much of it held by foreign banks. A departure would send ripples throughout the global economy and would also raise questions about the future of globalism, much as Britain's departure from the European Union did. There is an existential threat hanging over the single currency if we head into more elections this summer. I don't know how we get away from that now, given the scale of the financial implications. Kit Jux, chief foreign exchange strategist at Societe Generale, told the Wall Street Journal. In an unusual address, the governor of Italy's central bank, Ignazio Visco, warned about the consequences of such a move. We must never forget that we are only ever a few short steps away from the very serious risk of losing the irreplaceable asset of trust, he said. Italy's destiny is that of Europe. We are part of a very large and deeply integrated economic area whose development determines that of Italy and at the same time depends on it, he said. All right, so that is a description of what happened today. And I found a different article, this article from late in 2017, and it describes more generally what's going on in Italy. Why might people in Italy not want to be part of the Eurozone and use the euro anymore? David Ruggeri, an 18-year-old high school student in Rome, first began to notice the effects of the migration crisis in his early teens. It was a time when North Africa was in turmoil. Thousands of people were fleeing in makeshift boats to Italy's coasts and moving up through the rail network in search of better lives in the wealthier countries of Northern Europe. Some made it to Ruggeri's neighborhood on the eastern outskirts of Rome, where they eked out a living in squats and the black economy. The son of a teacher and an IT technician, Ruggeri holds the view, widespread in Italy, that the country has been abandoned by the European Union and forced to deal with the crisis alone, bearing the brunt without adequate funds to deal with it, disadvantaged by the EU rules that asylum seekers must claim refuge in the country they first arrive in, irrespective of whether they hoped to travel to another EU country. Asked whether he feels European, he hesitates. It's really a good question, Ruggeri pauses. Yes, I feel like a European citizen because we are in the EU and we are one of the founding members. But at this moment, I don't see good things from Europe because of the problems with immigration. They are helping us very little. There's an emergency, and it seems like the only thing that's important to them is money. Ruggeri is a member of an Italian generation that has known only economic stagnation, and which will head to the ballot box the first time in a general election next spring. They were born around the same time as the Euro, 1999, and are now old enough to vote. They've seen nothing but political and economic crisis since their childhoods, politicians apparently unable to fix them. That's a pretty picture. The experiences of this Euro generation are one of the reasons behind the widespread public disillusionment with Italian politics. They also help explain why Italy has gone from being one of the most enthusiastic members of the EU to one of its most disaffected, and why the country stands a not so little risk of handing the reins of government over to a Eurosceptic leader. This outcome would upturn the EU's political order and possibly reignite the financial bonfire that the continent's leaders have only recently managed to bring back under control. In my life, it seems that it has always been like this, says 19-year-old Mariolus Giardini, a Milan native who has finished school but is not yet in work or university. As long as I can remember, there has been talk of crisis and about how Italy needs to fix its economy. A couple of years ago, it seemed like perhaps it might get better, but I suppose it's something that happens slowly, she adds. I can't remember a time when the situation of Italy was good. Disillusioned youth. In countries like France, the UK, Germany, and the Netherlands, polls show a notable generational difference in attitudes toward the EU. Young people tend to feel more positively toward the bloc, while older people tend to hold less favorable opinions. In Italy, the trend is reversed. Voters aged under 45 are significantly more likely to think Italy is on the wrong track, 71% compared to half of voters over 45, according to a study conducted by Benenson Strategy Group in October. The study found that if Italy were to hold a referendum on EU membership, 51% of voters under 45 would vote to leave, while 46% would vote to remain. In contrast, Respondents over 45 supported staying in the bloc by 68% to 26%. Young voters' unhappiness with the EU came from a sense that what's good for the bloc comes at Italy's expense. Strong majorities among the young said that the migrant crisis showed the EU could not be counted on to help Italy with its biggest challenges. What it showed, they concluded, is that the EU only cared about itself. There's one thing young Italian voters have in common with their peers in other European countries: less likely to vote. They are rarely courted by politicians, making them less interested in politics. But even then, in Italy, the problem is exacerbated by demography. With nearly half of the Italian population older than 45, the young are outnumbered. For sure, the people who are in power now are really old. They are very removed from what we need now and the needs of the future, said Federico Borré, a 19-year-old from the Aosta Valley who recently began studying at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. Young people definitely believe they are cut off from politics. Asked what major events he recalls living through, Borré reels off the prime ministers the country has churned through the last 6 years. Berlusconi, Monti, Letta, Renzi, he says, not one was able to have a full mandate. The governments were changing rapidly. Borré's generation is the most educated in Italy, but it also has the EU's highest percentage of young people not in education, training, or work, almost a third according to Eurostat. Youth unemployment is the highest after Greece and Spain. For those with jobs, conditions are highly lopsided. A young army of precarious workers that can only dream of one day being granted the ironclad contracts, pensions, and protections of their older colleagues. It's a generation that thinks it will be worse off than their parents. 8 in 10, according to a survey of 16 to 30-year-olds conducted by the European Commission, believe young people have been excluded from a good economic and social life by the economic crisis. Italian Euroscepticism, demographics. There is a generational gap and a north-south divide in support for the EU among Italians. The difference in other demographics are much smaller. Percentage of support to leave the EU in a political referendum is twice as big among younger citizens. So this is what was discussed earlier. The older people think that they should remain, and the younger people don't really think they should remain. Younger people really think they should leave. The younger people also are, there are fewer people saying they don't know, so they're more decisive. Perhaps the older people are a little bit less confident that they know everything. That tends to happen as you age. Young Italians are more pessimistic about the direction of their country. So the right direction, very few young people believe that the country is going in the right direction. They're very unhappy. And among older people, they're also unhappy, but they are substantially... they're also unhappy, but they're substantially less unhappy than the younger people. But who is to blame? Young citizens have a more negative view of the role of the EU. What's good for Europe is good for Italy. Or what's good for Europe comes at Italy's expense. And are less hopeful that reforms could be made to make the EU work better for Italy. I have to wonder, especially among the Italians who are kind of in their 20s and are young, I think, and this is certainly true of me when I was younger, I thought that I could make a change work, and changes and the theoretical way that they could work out, it was crystal clear to me. And the older I get, the more I see things screw up, and the more I see the same mistakes repeated over and over again, and that makes me more skeptical that some of these dramatic changes are going to work out the way that people say that they will work out, especially when I question those people about the details of the system, and they don't know all that much. For example, universal health care in the United States. And if you talk to somebody who strongly supports universal healthcare in the United States about how much they know about the way that healthcare functions and the cost of healthcare and the cost of universal healthcare, many of those people cannot answer basic questions about the per capita cost of universal healthcare. And that concerns me a lot. Not to say that I think the U.S. has a good, sustainable, workable healthcare system. I don't. It just means that I don't know what the right answer is, because I know the current system's not good, and I know that people supporting a dramatically different system often cannot satisfy my feeling that they know what they're talking about when they're questioned about it. Anyhow, off that subject, these conditions have led to a long-running brain drain that has accelerated in recent years as young people, often the most ambitious and talented, seek better prospects abroad, a loss of Italy's most cosmopolitan voices that further reduces the group that could introduce generational change. Boré, the son of a teacher and a retired health worker, describes the EU in positive terms as an institution that allowed him to travel and learn English and then invested in infrastructure in his region. But like many internationally minded Italians, Boré does not see a future for himself in Italy. At the moment, I have no plans to go back, he said. I am more interested in the wider world. Euro bashing. Almost as soon as the first euro notes and coins began changing hands in Italy in 2002, the currency became the focus of generalized economic grievance. Ordinary Italians began grumbling that prices had gone up while wages stayed the same. Politicians tapped into this early. The Northern League called for a referendum on the return of the lira as early as 2005, as Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi used international events to play up friction with Germany and appeal to Italian pride. Fast forward to 2017, and the euro and the EU have been turned into rhetorical punching bags by politicians of all stripes, from left to right, regionalists to neo-fascists. Conveniently, they shift blame for Italy's problems outside the country. Overall, just 39% of Italians believe the country has benefited on balance from being in the EU, the lowest level in the bloc, according to a recent Kantar survey by the European Parliament. It's a striking turnaround for a country that was once among the most enthusiastic about integration, the birthplace of the EU founding father Altiero Spinelli and the EU's precursor, the European Economic Community. Who Eurosceptics vote for in Italy? The voters of the Five Star Movement are the most Eurosceptic, while the highest support for the EU in a potential membership referendum comes from voters of the governing Democratic Party. Okay, so if we mouse over, we can see some of the parties there. The shift is reflected in the platforms and promises of the political parties that will compete in the next election due before May 20th, 2018. The Five Star Movement, which wants a referendum on Euro membership, is forecast to win a quarter of the votes or more. The anti-immigration Eurosceptic Northern League has the support of another 16%. It's also reflected in how young people are casting their ballots. In a vote last year that was widely seen in Italy as a blow against the establishment, Italians aged 18 to 34 voted in large numbers against the center-left former Prime Minister Matteo Renzi's electoral reform, siding with a no campaign championed by the Five Star Movement and the Northern League. Anger in the heartlands. Dario Dedi, a 20-year-old first-year politics student at the University of Trieste, dreams of one day entering parliament. Born to a seamstress and a truck driver, his first taste of public service was as a student representative on the council of his school in Portogruaro, a town in northeast Italy. The position meant he could read his school's financial accounts. The cuts to education were clear, Dedi says. The school wasn't able to cover its expenses. It introduced a voluntary tax for parents to be able to keep going. Expected funds from the central government did not arrive. I think that my generation has been failed in many respects, Dedi says. And he's right. If Italy has that much debt, the debt that we reference here, they have to service that debt. And they have to take money away from education to service this debt. And he didn't take out this debt. Older people than him took out this debt. Asked what the most pressing issue should be for the next generation, for the next government, Dedi replies, immigration. He describes attitudes to immigrants changing among the people he knows in Veneto, in Italy's northeast, and said politicians needed to take action or the results could be dangerous. Politics isn't just about what political parties talk about, Dedi says. It's about what you hear between people when they speak about politics in the bar. I believe that immigration could endanger Italian democracy because it is causing revolutionary and even violent feelings in the working class areas, the stomach of the country, he said. A supporter of the Five-Star Movement, Dedi views Italy's adoption of the euro as a historic mistake that shackled the Italian economy. He views EU rules on spending as excessively punitive. Well, I don't know what the rules on spending are, but I would suspect that the spending restraints are due to their need to service that debt and pay down that debt. Maybe this guy doesn't see debt in the same way. I absolutely don't feel like a European citizen, Dedi said. There is some evidence that the euro has benefited stronger economies like Germany while making Italy less competitive. Eurostat data shows Italians have become steadily poorer in terms of what they can buy since 2005. And this is Beppe Grillo's Five-Star Movement is forecast to win a quarter of the votes or more. And I guess this is the five-star guy. But the reasons for that are not clear-cut. There was already economic stagnation before the euro, and indigenous structural problems are also at least partly responsible. Even if the euro has damaged Italy, it is not clear that leaving the currency, almost certain to be an economically traumatic event, would fix matters. Yet politically, these nuances may not matter. Nuances don't matter in politics. People are unhappy. They want to change. They don't actually care about calculating if that change is going to help them. They just want to change. Criticism of the euro and EU reliably resonates with part of the electorate. It is unclear what policies Eurosceptics would adopt if their rhetoric helps elevate them into a position of power. Even the most anti-EU parties have been inconsistent in their messaging, dialing back demands to exit the EU outright to mere calls for reforms, as Brexit tests out what ending membership really means. In recent months, the Five Stars, the Northern League, and Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia have all settled on the idea of calling for an alternative, parallel currency to the euro. As a policy, it's economically dubious and potentially destabilizing, but it taps into the national unhappiness while skirting the radicalism of dumping the currency altogether. What is clear is that dissatisfaction with the EU and the euro will feature prominently in Italy's election and potentially in many elections to come as the country's long economic stagnation drags on and Italy's crisis generation continues to grow. Yeah, so you can see that what impacts the markets is not just Italy's money issues, it's also this anger about immigration. And it's a complex issue. I know that I think in Sweden, for example, they had a lot of immigrants and there has been a lot of crime. And when that crime is happening in your neighborhood, it's a lot more difficult to maintain kind of a liberal theoretical detachment about what's going on. When bad things happen around you, the easy thing emotionally is to take that out on the people that you see. And that's something throughout our lives I think that we have to contend with, is we have to deal with being generous and gracious to other people, while at the same time doing practical things to maintain our own quality of life and stability. And we have to hold into our minds all of these things at once, that other people, that I wouldn't want to, die and be on my deathbed and think that I was an asshole to someone else just because they spoke a different language. But I'm also not happy, watching the people around me get robbed and doing nothing. So there has to be some reconciliation there. There has to be some thinking there, and for most of our lives, we're just going to have to hold both of those things at the same time, and try to be very careful to do the right thing. All right, that's it for 5-Year Club video number 153. Hope you know a little bit more about Italy, about what's going on in Europe, and about why the markets changed today. Perhaps tomorrow the markets will rise by 0.5% because people figure out that they've been maybe a little bit too scared of this Italian political stuff. Let's hope. Anyway. All right. I'm tired. Have a fabulous evening.